I paid for his mom's surgery and planned his sister's wedding, but at dinner they smirked and handed me divorce papers. Your job's done, his mother said. I smiled, stood up, and unzipped a folder. They went pale when they saw what I'd done. Your job is done. Those 4 words hit me like a slap across the face as my husband slid divorce papers across the dinner table. I stared at the manila envelope, my name scrawled across it in Justin's familiar handwriting, while his mother Scarlett smiled that cold, satisfied smile I'd grown to hate over the past 3 years. We're so grateful for everything you've done, dear, Scarlett purred, cutting her pot roast with surgical precision. The surgery, Madison's wedding, all those little expenses you handled. You've been such a dedicated wife. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories of financial empowerment. If you believe that everyone deserves respect in their relationships, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more people who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. Madison giggled into her wine glass, the sound sharp and grating. It's like having the world's most organized personal assistant, she said, not even trying to hide her smirk. Someone who actually pays for everything too. I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, watching my marriage dissolve over dinner like sugar in hot water. The formal dining room that had always felt more like a courtroom now truly was one, and I was the defendant being sentenced. 3 years. 3 years of emptying my bank account for Scarlett's emergency surgery that insurance somehow couldn't cover. 3 years of planning and paying for Madison's dream wedding while she treated me like hired help. 3 years of being the family ATM while they whispered about me behind my back. You understand, don't you? Justin said, not quite meeting my eyes. This arrangement has run its course. You've been useful, but it's time to move on. Useful. Like a kitchen appliance they were ready to replace. I looked around the table at their expectant faces. They were waiting for me to cry, to beg, to fall apart like they expected. Scarlett had that predatory gleam in her eyes, the one she got when she sensed weakness. Madison was practically bouncing in her chair, probably thinking about how quickly she could redecorate her house once I was gone. But instead of tears, I felt something else rising in my chest. Something cold and sharp and crystalline clear. I reached into my purse and pulled out a black leather folder. Thick. Heavy. Secured with a silver zipper that caught the light as I placed it carefully on the white tablecloth. The room went dead silent. What's that? Madison asked, her voice suddenly small and uncertain. I smiled, really smiled for the first time in months. Insurance, I said quietly. Scarlett's fork paused midway to her mouth. Insurance for what? For this exact moment. I kept my voice calm, conversational, like we were discussing the weather. You see, I've been keeping track. Every dollar, every receipt, every little favor I've done for this family. And I've been very, very thorough. Justin leaned forward, his confidence starting to crack around the edges. Melissa, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that your mother's surgery wasn't covered by insurance because she lied on her application. I'm talking about the $18,000 I spent on Madison's wedding that she never legally registered. I'm talking about 3 years of financial records that tell a very different story than the one you've been telling yourselves. The color drained from Scarlett's face. You can't prove anything. Can't I? I unzipped the folder slowly, deliberately, watching their eyes track the movement. Funny thing about being an accountant, I document everything. Every bank transfer. Every forged signature. Every fraudulent insurance claim. Madison's wine glass trembled in her hand. You're bluffing. Am I? I pulled out the first document, a bank statement highlighted in yellow. This is the transfer for $67,000 for your mother's surgery. Notice the date. 3 days after she was denied coverage for pre-existing conditions she failed to disclose. Scarlett's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. And this, I continued, producing another sheet, is the contract for Madison's wedding venue. Paid in full by me with a very interesting clause about fraudulent marriages. Turns out when you never file the legal paperwork, it's not actually a wedding. It's just a very expensive party. Stop, Justin said, his voice cracking. Just stop. Oh, I'm just getting started. I spread more documents across the table like playing cards. Medical fraud, wire fraud, identity theft. You've been busy, haven't you? And the beautiful thing is you made it so easy. You never read what you were signing. You just trusted that sweet, stupid Melissa would take care of everything. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire ready to snap. Scarlett's hands were shaking now, and Madison looked like she was about to be sick. Justin stared at the papers scattered across the table as if they were written in a foreign language. "What do you want?" he whispered. I smiled again, wider this time. "Want? I don't want anything, Justin. I already have everything I need." I gestured to the documents. Signed confessions, financial records, email trails. 3 years' worth of evidence that you used me, manipulated me, and committed multiple felonies in the process. "You wouldn't," Scarlett breathed. "Try me." I stood up slowly, leaving the folder open on the table like a bomb with the pin pulled. "You want to know what your job has done? It is. You used me to clean up your messes, to pay your bills, to make your problems disappear. But here's the thing about problems. They have a way of coming back." I walked around the table, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor with each measured step. "You thought you were getting rid of a liability. But what you actually did was create one. See, when you betray someone who handles your money, who knows your secrets, who has access to your entire financial history, well, that's just poor planning." Madison started to cry, quiet tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please, we can work this out." "Work it out?" I laughed, and the sound was sharper than I intended. "You mean like we worked out your mother's surgery? Or your wedding? Or the 50 other emergencies I've funded over the years?" I reached the door and turned back to look at them one last time. 3 people who had used me, dismissed me, and thrown me away like garbage. Now they sat frozen around their perfect dinner table, surrounded by evidence of their own greed and stupidity. "Enjoy your divorce papers," I said, my hand on the doorknob. "I'll be sending some papers of my own very soon. Multiple copies to multiple agencies. Sweet dreams." I walked out into the night air, leaving behind 3 years of their manipulation and my own naivety. The folder remained on the table like a ticking time bomb, and for the first time since I'd walked into that house, I felt like I could breathe again. Behind me, I heard the sound of chairs scraping against the floor and voices raised in panic. But I didn't look back. I had work to do. My hands shook as I drove home that night, the weight of 3 years crashing down on me like a collapsed building. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the darkness, engine ticking as it cooled, trying to process what had just happened. But the truth was, it hadn't just happened. It had been building for years, brick by brick, lie by lie. I remembered the beginning, how hopeful I'd been. How desperately I'd wanted to belong. When Justin first brought me home to meet his family, I'd been so nervous I'd baked 3 different desserts, unsure which one would make the best impression. Scarlett had taken one bite of my chocolate tart and declared it interesting, which I later learned was her way of saying terrible. But I didn't know that then. I thought if I just tried harder, if I proved myself worthy, she'd eventually accept me. The appointment started small. "Melissa, dear, could you drive me to the doctor? My back is acting up again." At first, I felt honored that she trusted me with something so personal. I'd sit in those sterile waiting rooms for hours, holding her purse, fetching her coffee, calling her insurance company when they inevitably had questions about her claims. "You're too eager," she'd tell me afterward, settling into my passenger seat with a dramatic sigh. "It's not a good look on a woman. Men don't like desperate wives." But I kept showing up. I memorized her schedule better than my own. Tuesday mornings were physical therapy. Thursday afternoons were her standing hair appointment at the salon across town. The expensive one she claimed was the only place that understood her delicate hair texture. Friday evenings were bridge club, where she'd complain about her daughter-in-law to her friends while I waited outside in the car like a chauffeur. I discovered her favorite pastries by trial and error. Almond croissants from the French bakery on 5th Street, but only on Sundays when they were fresh. I'd drive 20 minutes out of my way every weekend, standing in line with the other devoted family members and guilty spouses, spending money I couldn't afford on pastries she'd eat half of and throw away. "These aren't quite right," she'd say, breaking off a corner with manicured fingers. "Perhaps next time try that little place on Elm. I hear they're more authentic." But nothing was ever quite right. Not the pastries, not my timing, not the way I folded her laundry when she asked me to help with household tasks Justin was supposedly too busy to handle. I missed client meetings, rescheduled conference calls, and lost a potential promotion because I was always rushing off to handle another Scarlett emergency. Then Madison got engaged and everything escalated. I need someone I can trust, she'd said, grabbing my hands with tears in her eyes. Someone who really understands what makes a wedding special. Will you help me plan it? I was so touched, so grateful to finally be needed, that I said yes before asking any questions. Planning Madison's wedding became my second full-time job. I researched venues during my lunch breaks, called caterers from the office bathroom, and spent my evenings creating color-coded spreadsheets that would make military logistics officers weep with envy. The venue deposit alone was $8,000. Just put it on your card for now, Madison had said breezily. We'll sort out the money later. Later never came. When I mentioned it, she'd get that wounded look in her eyes and say something about how she thought family didn't keep track of such things. I booked the photographers, the florists, the string quartet. I tasted 17 different cake flavors across 4 different bakeries. I spent an entire Saturday crawling around on the floor of a warehouse, sorting through thousands of fairy lights to find the exact shade of warm white that matched Madison's vision. You're such a godsend, she'd tell people at bridal showers, her arm around my shoulders like we were best friends. I don't know what I'd do without her. But when her actual friends were around, the tone changed. I'd walk into rooms and catch the tail end of conversations that stopped abruptly when they saw me. Once I overheard her on the phone through the bathroom door at the bridal boutique. She's like a free assistant, Madison was saying, her voice bright with amusement. It's cute really. He tries so hard to be helpful. Justin says she's always been like that, desperate to please. Makes her easy to manage. Easy to manage. The words hit me like ice water. But it was Justin's transformation that cut the deepest. The man who'd once defended me at family gatherings, who'd pull me close when his mother made her cutting remarks, slowly began to drift away like a boat with a severed anchor. It started with small things. When Scarlett criticized the way I'd arranged the flowers I'd brought for Sunday dinner, Justin used to say, "Mom, they're beautiful. Melissa has great taste." Then it became, well, everyone has different preferences. Eventually, he'd just chuckle along with her criticisms as if my feelings were a shared joke between them. The night Madison accidentally spilled red wine on the white silk dress I'd lent her, a dress that had cost me 2 weeks' worth of grocery money, I expected Justin to at least acknowledge that it was unfortunate. Instead, he shrugged and said, "Accidents happen. It's just a dress. Just a dress. Just my money. Just my time. Just my dignity." He stopped touching me casually. No more hand on my back when we walked through doorways. No more absent-minded shoulder squeezes when he passed behind my chair. I became invisible in my own marriage, a ghost haunting the edges of his real life with his real family. The money request started after Scarlett's first surgery consultation. "Just a small loan, dear," she'd said, her voice weak and fragile. "The insurance is being difficult about coverage, and you know how these medical offices are about payment. I wouldn't ask, but $5,000. Then another $3,000 for additional tests. Then $10,000 more when the insurance claim was mysteriously denied. Always cash, always urgent, always with that wounded look when I hesitated. Madison's wedding expenses multiplied like bacteria. The caterer needed additional payment for unexpected costs. The florist had miscalculated the original quote. Invoices disappeared and had to be paid again. Every vendor seemed to have my phone number, my credit card information, and the assumption that I was personally responsible for every penny. "The booking confirmation must have gotten lost," Madison would say, wide-eyed and helpless. "Can you just handle it? You're so much better with these business things than I am." Justin waved off every questionable charge on our joint credit card. "Billing errors happen all the time," he'd say without looking up from his phone. "Just call the company and sort it out." But I was sorting it out by paying for everything twice. The tipping point came at Madison's engagement party. I'd spent 3 days cooking and decorating, transforming our backyard into something worthy of a magazine spread. I was exhausted, my feet aching from standing all day, when I overheard Madison holding court near the dessert table. "Melissa's basically Justin's secretary at this point," she announced to a circle of her sorority sisters, gesturing toward me with her champagne flute. "She handles everything, bills, appointments, party planning. It's like having staff, but family staff, you know." The group laughed, and Justin, standing right beside them, laughed too. Not uncomfortably, not defensively, but genuinely amused by his sister's characterization of his wife as hired help. I stood there holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres I'd spent hours preparing, watching my husband laugh at my expense, and something inside me crystallized into diamond-hard resolve. That night, after everyone had gone home and Justin had fallen asleep without helping clean up, I drove to the 24-hour pharmacy and bought a simple composition notebook. Black and white, nothing fancy, with lined pages that would hold 3 years' worth of documentation. On the first page I wrote the date and a single sentence. Today I started keeping track. Then I began to write. Every dollar, every favor, every small humiliation. Every appointment I'd driven to, every bill I'd paid, every time they'd smiled to my face and laughed behind my back. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the sun started to rise, until I'd filled 12 pages with the true story of my marriage. And for the first time in 3 years I felt like I had some measure of control over my own life. The notebook would grow thick with evidence. But that night it was just the beginning of my journey back to myself. The next morning I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. My hands were steady as I dialed, my voice perfectly normal as I explained to my supervisor that I had a family emergency to handle. In a way it wasn't even a lie. I spread everything across my kitchen table. Bank statements, receipts, credit card bills, text messages, emails. 3 years of financial carnage laid out like evidence at a crime scene. The sheer volume was staggering. I'd been hemorrhaging money so gradually that I'd never seen the full picture until now. $67,000 for Scarlett's surgery. $38,000 for Madison's wedding. Countless smaller amounts. Grocery runs, gas money, restaurant bills where I somehow always ended up paying, utility payments when their accounts were temporarily frozen. The grand total made my stomach lurch. But I wasn't just collecting receipts anymore. I was building a case. I opened my laptop and created a new spreadsheet, titling it Family Investment Portfolio. If they wanted to treat me like a business transaction, then I'd give them one they'd never forget. Every expense got categorized, dated, and cross-referenced with corresponding text messages or emails where they'd promised to pay me back next week, or assured me it was just this once. The beauty of being an accountant is that numbers don't lie. People do, but numbers tell the truth with brutal clarity. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. Thanks again for everything yesterday. You're the best sister-in-law ever. I screenshot it and added it to a folder labeled Evidence of Acknowledgement. Every heart emoji, every you're the best, every I owe you big time, was now documentation of their awareness of the debt they'd accumulated. That afternoon I called my old college roommate Sarah, who'd become a financial advisor in Seattle. We hadn't spoken in months, but she answered on the second ring. Melissa, what a surprise. How's married life treating you? Actually, that's why I'm calling. I need some professional advice and I need it to stay confidential. There was a pause. Sarah had always been sharp. What kind of advice? The kind that turns gifts into loans retroactively. Ah. Her voice shifted into business mode. How much money are we talking about? Just over 100,000. The silence stretched longer this time. Melissa, what the hell have you gotten yourself into? I explained everything while Sarah took notes. By the end she was making those little clicking sounds with her tongue that meant she was thinking hard. Okay, here's what we're going to do, she said finally. Every transaction over $500 can be restructured as a personal loan if you have any documentation showing acknowledgement of the debt. Text messages count. Emails count. Even verbal agreements if you have witnesses. What about the smaller amounts? Those are trickier, but if you can establish a pattern of lending behavior, you might be able to bundle them into loan modification agreements. The key is making everything look legitimate and above board. We spent 3 hours on the phone going through every transaction. Sarah helped me draft official loan documents, backdated but legal, with interest rates that were aggressive but not predatory. By the time we hung up, I had a folder full of legitimate financial instruments that transformed my family's casual exploitation into formal debt obligations. The next step required more courage than I thought I possessed. I made an appointment with Dr. Harrison's Scarlett's surgeon, under the pretense of asking about postoperative care for my mother-in-law. I brought my lawyer, Janet Walsh, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who specialized in medical billing disputes. Mrs. Chin, Dr. Harrison said, settling behind his desk with Scarlett's file. Your mother-in-law's recovery has been remarkable. The procedure was quite extensive, but she's healing beautifully. I'm actually here about the billing, I said, watching his expression shift. There seems to have been some confusion about payment responsibility. I handed him a folder containing the loan documents Sarah had helped me create, along with copies of all the payments I'd made directly to his office. As you can see, I've been covering Mrs. Patterson's medical expenses as a personal loan to her family. However, given the substantial amount involved, I need to ensure proper documentation exists in your files. Janet leaned forward. We'd like to add a creditor protection clause to Mrs. Patterson's account. If the loan payments cease, my client needs legal recourse to recover the medical equipment and procedures she's funded. Dr. Harrison looked uncomfortable. I'm not sure I understand. It's quite simple, Janet explained, her voice crisp and professional. Mrs. Chin has essentially financed Mrs. Patterson's surgery. If Mrs. Patterson defaults on repayment, the medical devices, procedures, and ongoing care revert to Mrs. Chen's ownership until the debt is satisfied. That's unusual, but perfectly legal, Janet assured him. Medical debt can be secured against the procedures themselves. We just need your office to acknowledge Mrs. Chin as the primary financial stakeholder in this case. 30 minutes later, we walked out with signed documentation that gave me legal claim to Scarlett's surgical outcomes. It wouldn't cause her physical harm, but it would give me leverage she couldn't ignore. Madison's wedding vendors were easier targets. I'd been the one signing contracts, providing credit card information and handling communications. Technically, I was already the primary contractor for most services. I spent the next week making calls, each conversation carefully scripted and recorded with the vendor's permission. Hi, this is Melissa Chin calling about the Patterson wedding contract. I need to add some clarification to our payment terms. To the caterer, if the final payment isn't received by the specified date, we'll need to cancel the reception service. To the florist, I'd like to add a clause stating that all floral arrangements remain my property until payment is complete. To the band, could we modify the contract to specify that performance is contingent on final payment 24 hours in advance? Each vendor agreed readily. They were used to nervous families wanting extra security on their wedding investments. They had no idea they were helping me build a house of cards that could collapse with a single phone call. The final piece was the most delicate. I needed access to Richard Patterson's estate documents, Scarlett's deceased husband's paperwork. I knew she kept everything in the file cabinet in her home office, but I needed a legitimate reason to be there. The opportunity came when Scarlett called asking me to help organize her tax documents. You're so good with numbers, dear, she said, her voice honey-sweet over the phone. And I simply can't make sense of all these forms. I spent an entire Saturday in her office, methodically photographing every document while she napped on the couch downstairs. Richard's will, insurance policies, property deeds, bank statements from accounts that had never been properly closed. A treasure trove of legal loose ends. The estate attorney I consulted, Marcus Reed, was a grandfatherly man with kind eyes and a steel-trap mind for legal details. This is quite irregular, he said, studying the documents I'd brought him. Mrs. Patterson appears to have several outstanding obligations tied to her late husband's estate that were never properly resolved. What kind of obligations? Medical debt for one. Credit card debt that was supposed to be settled through the estate. And... He paused, adjusting his glasses. There's a promissory note here for a substantial sum that was never collected. A promissory note? From Mrs. Patterson to her husband's business partner, dated 6 months before his death. $50,000. If this was never satisfied. He looked up at me with sharp intelligence in his eyes. Someone could file a lien against the family home to collect on this debt. Even now. Years later. Estate debt doesn't disappear just because people ignore it, Mrs. Chen. If someone had legitimate claim to represent this debt. He let the sentence hang in the air. 2 weeks later, I walked out of Marcus Reed's office with legal documents that gave me the right to file a lien against Scarlett's house. The promissory note had been real, the debt legitimate, and through a series of perfectly legal transfers, I now owned that obligation. Everything was in place. Every smile, every dismissive laugh, every casual exploitation now had a corresponding legal document. They'd built their house of cards on my back, but I'd been laying the foundation for their fall the entire time. I sat in my car outside Marcus's office, holding the final piece of my puzzle, and smiled for the second time in years. They wanted to play games with my life. Time to show them what a real player looked like. The sound of that zipper opening was the loudest thing in the room. I watched their faces as I spread the first document across their pristine white tablecloth. A detailed spreadsheet with their names highlighted in yellow, red, and what I'd come to think of as betrayal blue. "Let's start with the basics," I said, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "Scarlett, your total debt to me is currently $67,432. This includes your surgery, postoperative care, medications, and the lovely recuperation vacation to Cabo you claimed was medically necessary." Scarlett's fork clattered against her plate. "Debt? I never agreed to any debt. Those were gifts." I smiled and pulled out a manila folder thick with printouts. "Actually, you did. Right here." I placed a series of text messages in front of her, blown up to 12-point font so she couldn't claim she couldn't read them. "April 15th, you texted me, 'We'll pay you back as soon as insurance comes through.' May 3rd, 'You're an angel, we'll make this right.' June 22nd, 'I owe you everything.'" Her face went white as bone china. Those were just expressions of gratitude. Were they? I turned to a fresh page in my folder. "Because here's your signed acknowledgement of the loan terms my financial advisor sent you. The email you replied to with, 'Sure, whatever she said,' has been legally binding since the moment you hit send." Justin leaned forward, trying to read over his mother's shoulder. "This is ridiculous. You can't just retroactively." "Actually, I can." I pulled out another document, this one bearing an official letterhead. "Sarah Morrison, Certified Financial Advisor, State License Number 4471. She's very good at what she does. Turns out, when someone accepts money with the acknowledgement that it will be repaid, and that acknowledgement is documented, it constitutes a binding loan agreement under state law." Madison's wine glass trembled in her hands. "What about my wedding? You can't possibly." "Oh, honey." I turned several pages, revealing a new section of horrors. "Your wedding is the most interesting part. Madison Patricia Henderson. Except that's not your legal name anymore, is it? You never filed the marriage certificate. You never submitted the paperwork to the county clerk. You never registered with the state." The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that your beautiful wedding last month? Legally meaningless. You're not married, Madison. You had a very expensive party where you played dress up." I flipped to the next page. "And since the venue, caterers, photographers, and band were all contracted under my name, as the financial guarantor, I own that party. Which means I can cancel your upcoming reception." "Cancel?" she whispered. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. "Already done. The Riverside Country Club received my cancellation this morning. Full refund minus the service fee. Your dress? Custom order that was never legally transferred to your ownership. The band you booked for your anniversary party next month? Also cancelled. The photographers who were supposed to deliver your wedding album? Well, since there was no legal wedding, there's no legal obligation to deliver the photos." Madison started to cry, but I wasn't finished. "But the really beautiful part," I continued, spreading more documents across the table, "is that none of this is personal. It's just business. The same kind of business you've been conducting with my money for 3 years. Justin tried to grab one of the papers, his hands shaking with what I assumed was rage. "This is insane. None of this will hold up in court." I laughed, genuinely amused for the first time all evening. "Court? Oh, Justin, we're not going to court. We're way past that." I pulled out a thick folder labeled Communications, and opened it to reveal hundreds of printed screenshots. "Do you remember this text thread from last Christmas? Where you and Madison were making fun of my desperate attempts to fit in with the family?" His face went gray as he recognized his own words staring back at him. "Or this email chain where you three discussed how to get me to pay for Madison's wedding without making it seem like you were asking for money?" I flipped through the pages like a flipbook, watching their expressions change with each revelation. Or my personal favorite, the voice message Scarlett left me last month where she said, and I quote, "Melissa's so eager to help, we should take advantage of it while we can." Scarlett's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "The thing about being married to someone for 3 years," I said, organizing the papers into neat piles, is that you have access to their phone, their email, their text messages. Especially when they're careless enough to leave everything synced to the family computer. I reached into my bag and pulled out a tablet, swiping to a video file. Would you like to see the security footage from Madison's engagement party? The part where you all discussed how pathetic I was for trying so hard. Or should we skip to the good part where you planned this whole dinner ambush? The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Madison's tears had stopped, replaced by a look of pure terror. Scarlett sat frozen, her hands clenched in her lap. Justin stared at the tablet screen as if it might explode. Here's what's going to happen, I said, closing the tablet and setting it aside. You're going to sit there and listen while I explain exactly how deep you've dug yourselves. Because we're not even to the good part yet. I pulled out the final folder, the thick one that had been sitting in my lawyer's office for 2 weeks, growing heavier with each additional document we'd added. Scarlett, remember when you asked me to help organize your tax documents? Such a thoughtful daughter-in-law helping with all that tedious paperwork. I opened the folder to reveal photocopies of documents she'd never expected to see again. Funny thing about estate planning, sometimes important details get overlooked for years. Her eyes widened as she recognized her late husband's handwriting on a promissory note. $50,000, I read from the document. Borrowed from Patterson and Associates, never repaid. The debt was supposed to be settled through the estate, but somehow that never happened. Amazing how paperwork can just slip through the cracks. That debt was forgiven when Richard died, Scarlett stammered. Was it? I turned the page to reveal a legal transfer document. Because according to the estate settlement company, this debt was sold to a collection agency last month. And that collection agency just happened to transfer the debt to a private individual. I smiled sweetly. Me. Justin finally found his voice. You can't seriously expect us to believe that I now legally own the debt secured against this house? I pulled out the final document, a lien notice bearing official stamps and signatures. Actually, yes. I can and do expect you to believe it because it's true. This house, the one you're sitting in right now, is collateral for a debt that's been accumulating interest for 4 years. The paper fluttered as I placed it in the center of the table, right next to their abandoned dinner plates. At current interest rates, the total owed is $73,600. Add that to Scarlett's medical debt, Madison's wedding debt, and 3 years of miscellaneous family expenses, and we're looking at just over $200,000 in total obligations. Madison's voice came out as barely a whisper. 200,000? $214,876, I corrected. To be precise. The house settled around us with a small creaking sound, as if the walls themselves were sighing under the weight of what I'd just revealed. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating the dining room windows before disappearing into the night, leaving us in our circle of damning documents and shattered illusions. Now, I said, folding my hands in my lap like I was about to discuss weekend plans, shall we talk about payment terms? The silence that followed my question about payment terms lasted exactly 14 seconds. I know because I counted, watching the reality sink into their faces like water into sand. Scarlett was the first to crack. How could you be this heartless? She gasped, her hand pressed dramatically to her chest. After everything we gave you, the love, the acceptance, the place in our family. I laughed, actually laughed, and the sound echoed off the dining room walls like breaking glass. Love. Acceptance. I wiped tears from my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. You gave me chores and debt, Scarlett. You gave me 3 years of feeling like a servant in my own marriage. That's not true, she protested, but her voice wavered. Isn't it? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a specific recording. Should I play the voice message where you told your bridge club that I was useful for manual labor but not much else? Or maybe the one where you said Justin could do so much better if he wasn't stuck with someone so desperate? Her face crumpled like wet paper. Madison suddenly pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. This is insane, she shrieked, mascara already starting to run down her cheeks. You can't just destroy people's lives because you're having some kind of mental breakdown. Mental breakdown? I remained seated, completely calm while she paced behind her chair like a caged animal. Madison, I'm an accountant. This is what accountants do. We track expenses, calculate returns on investment, and assess when assets become liabilities. I'm not a liability, she wailed. Aren't you? I turned to a fresh page in my folder. $38,000 for a wedding that never legally happened. $12,000 in borrowed money that was never repaid. $6,000 in damaged or lost items I lent you. Another $4,000 in dinners, shopping trips, and spa days I paid for while you complained about being broke on social media. Her pacing grew more frantic. Those were family things. Sisters-in-law do things for each other. Do they? I looked up at her with genuine curiosity. What exactly did you do for me, Madison? Because I've been going through 3 years of memories and I can't seem to recall a single instance where you spent your money on me, helped me with anything, or showed up when I needed support. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. That's what I thought. I turned back to my documents. You ruined your future the day you built it on lies and other people's money. I just documented the process. Madison fled the room then, her sobs echoing from the hallway as her heels clicked against the marble floor. I heard a door slam somewhere in the depths of the house, followed by muffled wailing that sounded like a wounded animal. Justin, who had been sitting in stunned silence throughout this exchange, finally found his voice. Melissa, please. We can fix this. His eyes were wide and desperate, darting between my face and the documents spread across the table. Let's talk about this rationally. Like adults. I met his gaze with a smile that I knew didn't reach my eyes. Talk? Like adults. I leaned back in my chair, studying the man I'd once thought I'd spend my life with. When exactly did you start considering me an adult, Justin? Was it when you stopped defending me to your mother? When you started laughing at your sister's jokes about me being the hired help? Or maybe when you planned this whole dinner ambush without giving me so much as a heads up? He struggled to find words. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen? I asked, genuinely curious. Were you going to ease me into the idea that my marriage was a business transaction? Maybe give me a performance review first? Great job handling our finances, mediocre job at being a wife. We're letting you go, but thanks for your service? He flinched as if I'd struck him. That's not fair. Fair. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Justin, I spent 3 years trying to earn a place in your family while you all treated me like a combination ATM and personal assistant. I funded your mother's surgery, planned your sister's wedding, and subsidized your entire lifestyle. And your response to my dedication was to hand me divorce papers over dinner like I was getting fired from a job I didn't even know I was interviewing for. We never asked you to. Yes, you did. I pulled out another folder, this one filled with printed text messages. You asked constantly. Could you help Mom with her medical bills? Madison really needs help with wedding costs. Just this once, we'll pay you back. You asked and asked and asked, and when I gave and gave and gave, you decided I was pathetic for being so willing to help. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 8 o'clock, its deep bronze tones marking the passage of time like a funeral bell. Justin's shoulders sagged as the weight of his choices settled on them. This wasn't a marriage, I said quietly, my voice cutting through the aftermath of Madison's dramatic exit. This was a transaction. I was the investor, you were the beneficiaries, and now it's time to settle the books. The deal's closed. As if summoned by my words, the doorbell rang. Justin's head snapped up. Who could that be? I checked my watch. Right on time. I stood and walked toward the front door, my heels clicking against the floor with the same steady rhythm as a metronome. That would be my legal representation. You're what? I opened the door to reveal Janet Walsh, my attorney, accompanied by a stern-looking man in a charcoal gray suit carrying a briefcase that looked expensive enough to fund a small car purchase. Mrs. Chin, Janet said with professional warmth. I hope we're not interrupting dinner. Not at all, I replied, stepping aside to let them enter. We were just discussing payment schedules. The man in the gray suit extended his hand to Justin, who stood frozen by the dining room table like a deer caught in headlights. Mr. Patterson? I'm David Reeves from Morrison & Associates Collections. I believe we have some documents for you. Janet opened her briefcase with the efficiency of a surgeon preparing for an operation. We have foreclosure notices, debt collection demands, and medical payment enforcement documents. There are also cancellation notices for various services and contracts currently under Mrs. Chen's financial control. Scarlett made a sound like a balloon losing air. Foreclosure. The lien on this property is quite substantial, David explained, consulting his paperwork. Given the accumulated debt and interest, immediate payment would be required to avoid foreclosure proceedings. How immediate? Justin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 30 days, Janet replied crisply. Though given the amount owed, we're prepared to discuss alternative arrangements. Madison reappeared in the doorway, her face blotchy and tear-stained. Alternative arrangements? I turned to face all three of them, standing there in their expensive dining room surrounded by the debris of their former certainty. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by the presence of legal authority and the cold reality of consequences. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady as a heartbeat. You're going to sit down, you're going to listen, and you're going to understand that every choice has a price. You spent 3 years treating me like I was disposable, and now you're going to learn what it costs to dispose of someone who's been keeping track. They scrambled to their chairs like children called to attention by a stern teacher. Scarlett's hands shook as she reached for her water glass. Madison hiccuped quietly, trying to control her breathing. Justin stared at the legal documents spreading across his table like a plague of official papers. I remained standing, looking down at the three people who had shaped and then shattered my world, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete control over my own destiny. Now, I said as Janet and David took their positions flanking the table like bookends of justice, let's talk business. The negotiations lasted until 3 in the morning. I sat in that dining room for 7 hours, watching three people who once controlled my life scramble to salvage whatever pieces they could from the wreckage of their own making. Janet and David worked with clinical precision, laying out payment schedules, asset seizures, and legal consequences while I observed like a scientist studying lab rats in a maze. By the end, Scarlett had agreed to sell her jewelry collection to cover part of her medical debt. Madison would forfeit her trust fund, the one she'd never bothered to mention, while letting me pay for everything. Justin signed over his share of the family business to a debt management company that would garnish his wages for the next 15 years. The house would go into temporary receivership while they arranged to buy back their own debt at 60 cents on the dollar. They'd be renters in their own home until they could prove financial stability. I didn't feel triumphant walking out of that house. I felt empty, like a balloon that had finally stopped holding air. The weight I'd carried for 3 years was gone, but so was everything else. The hope, the love, the dreams of a different ending. 3 weeks later, I stood in my new apartment holding a single key. The studio was nothing like the sprawling house I'd shared with Justin. 400 square feet of honesty. One room that served as bedroom, living room, and office. A tiny kitchen with exactly enough space for one person's meals. A bathroom with a shower just wide enough for me to stretch my arms without touching the walls. It was perfect. I set my last box on the second-hand table I'd bought from a college student moving back home. Everything in this space was mine. Paid for with my money, chosen by my taste, arranged for my comfort. No compromises, no negotiations, no walking on eggshells around other people's preferences. The silence was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I unpacked slowly, savoring each decision. Where to put my books, how to arrange my few pieces of furniture, which corner would get the most morning light. For the first time in years, every choice was mine alone. That evening, I lit a single candle, lavender, the irony not lost on me, and sat at my new table to read the mail that had been forwarding to my temporary address. The letter from Dr. Harrison's office was brief and professional. Scarlett's account had been marked payment pending while the legal issues were resolved. Her medical care would continue uninterrupted, but the debt enforcement clause remained active. I'd never wanted to hurt her physically. Her pride, on the other hand, had been overdue for a reality check. I pulled out a piece of cream-colored stationery, a small luxury I'd bought for myself, and wrote a handwritten note to Rebecca Martinez, the paralegal who'd helped me navigate the estate debt transfer. Her patience and attention to detail had made everything possible, but more importantly, she'd listened to my story without judgment and believed that I deserved better. Dear Rebecca, I wrote, thank you for helping me find my voice in the language that matters most, legal documentation. You didn't just help me with paperwork. You helped me reclaim my life. The next morning, I walked into a community center downtown and sat in a circle of folding chairs with 12 other women. The support group for survivors of financial abuse met every Thursday evening, but I'd been too ashamed to attend while I was still trapped in my situation. "Would anyone like to share?" asked Dr. Patricia Wong, the therapist who led the group. I raised my hand before I could lose my nerve. "I'm Melissa," I said, my voice steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. I was married for 3 years, and for 3 years I thought love meant sacrifice. I thought if I just gave enough money, time, dignity, I'd eventually earn my place in my husband's family. Heads nodded around the circle. I saw recognition in their eyes, the knowing look of women who'd walked similar paths. I paid for his mother's surgery, his sister's wedding, their bills, their emergencies, their wants disguised as needs. And when they were done using me, they handed me divorce papers over dinner and thanked me for my service. My voice caught slightly on the last words, but I pushed through. I was never the wife. I was the investor. A woman across the circle started crying quietly. Another reached over and squeezed my hand. "The thing is," I continued, "I thought investors were supposed to get a return. Turns out when you're a good enough accountant, you can collect on any debt, even emotional ones." After the meeting, 3 women approached me with their own stories. Sarah, whose ex-husband had emptied their joint accounts and left her with his credit card debt. Maria, whose boyfriend had convinced her to co-sign for a car he crashed while driving to another woman's house. Linda, whose children had systematically drained her retirement fund with a series of manufactured emergencies. We stood outside the community center under the streetlights, sharing phone numbers and promises to stay in touch. For the first time since my marriage ended, I felt like I belonged somewhere. That night, I sat at my small table with the composition notebook I'd started 3 years ago, the one that had begun with, "Today I started keeping track." The pages were full now, dense with figures and dates and the careful documentation of my own exploitation. I turned to the very last page and wrote, "June 15th, final entry." I wasn't the wife. I was the investor. And I collected every cent. Today I start keeping track of something different. The life I'm building with my own choices, my own money, my own dreams. The ledger is balanced. The books are closed. Time to start a new story. I closed the notebook and placed it on the shelf next to my accounting textbooks and the small collection of novels I'd never had time to read while I was busy managing other people's lives. Tomorrow I would start freelance bookkeeping for small businesses. Honest work for honest pay, helping people manage their finances instead of enabling their manipulation. I'd already lined up 3 clients who valued my skills and paid my rates without negotiation. I blew out the lavender candle and went to bed in my own space on my own schedule with my own dreams waiting in the darkness. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without checking my phone, without worrying about someone else's emergency, without calculating how much their next crisis would cost me. I slept the sleep of someone who had finally learned the difference between love and transaction, between generosity and exploitation, between marriage and business arrangement. I slept like a woman who had collected her debts and bought back her own life. And in the morning I would wake up free. If this story of financial justice had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Melissa unzipped that black folder and watched their faces go pale, knowing she held all the cards. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.